Did you run out of food last year on your small private parcel and on your food plot program? I think a lot of folks do. And there's a lot of reasons other than you just need to shoot more deer. And it might be that you don't need to shoot more deer, you just need to do it right. And so a lot of times someone will make a recommendation, well, if you have an exposure cage and there are lots of foods in the cage, lots of food that's eaten down to the ground outside, they need to shoot more deer. That's not the answer. In fact, try to focus on doing it right. And we're going to talk about these real quick of some easy ways to make sure that your food lasts longer next fall and that you're not left scratching your head wondering what could I have done different. And I'll start out, number one, daylight browse. I would say the opposite of this is you just have a pine forest plantation, or you have a mature woods with no browse in it, no acorns, no mass crop. And even then, mass crop is just for a limited period of time. You need something that lasts from the beginning of the season to the end of the season at least. We're just looking at a hunting season window. Hardly anyone has enough land to manage a deer herd for 365. It takes thousands of acres, not a few hundred or less, or 40 or 20 acres. We're looking at what can we do during that deer hunting season, which is actually the size of the herd that we can actually do something with in the first place. So when it comes to more food that lasts, get more daylight browse. Don't send your deer out of starving woods, starving, to a food source or a food plot in the afternoon and expect them to not eat that much food. I'll go in the UP in Michigan where I had my property for a long time. We had up to 255 acres at one time. We had a lot of low value timber around there, a lot of fir, pine, spruce, tag alder, a little bit of red maple, a little bit of aspen, but the soil is so poor when you cut the aspen, there wasn't much regeneration in some of those areas, and they're really old for their size and diameter of tree. The bottom line is the food plots we had, 8.5 acres, that were carved out of the sand, and I spread 50 to 60 tons, 60 some tons of lime by hand on those plots, put a lot of TLC into them. They just didn't produce a lot of food that would last into the season, but it was the only game in town. The deer, they would feed 5 times in a 24-hour period, some of the does and fawns on those food plots. Because there was nothing else. They bed nearby, they come in and hit the food, then they go back, eat a little browse and garbage back in their bedding areas, and then they come back out. If I would have had really good aspen regeneration, hardwood regeneration, lots of briars, shrub tips, then I would have taken those hunger pains that happened during the day in their bedding areas and reduced them greatly so that when they went to the food plots, it would allow that food to last longer because not going into those food plots with hardly eating anything of any kind of quality during the daylight. That's why browse is the number one thing you need on your property during the daylight outside of your food plots. If you have lots of food but no browse, why are the deer going to be there? If you have lots of browse but no quality food, they'll just go to a neighbor's that has quality food. You're not going to hold deer because of just the food plot or just the browse. You need a balance of both. Very critical. Pockets of grain. What do I mean by this? You guys ever had a farmer leave the outside 8 rows of corn? When you get into November, there's no corn. It's because every critter comes out with that linear planting, hits the corn, goes back into the woods, hits the corn under the cover of darkness or during the daylight, and they consume all that between birds and critters and deer, raccoons especially. That corn is gone. If you take that same amount of corn, let's say it was 2 acres spread out over a half mile, and you put it in a 2-acre cluster or pocket, then what I find and what we see on properties is that interior portion of the corn will remain intact, and you're able to bring that same amount of acreage of corn that you plant in pockets, the same goes for beans, into the fall as opposed to those long linear lengths of grain. Hope that makes sense. It's one way to make that grain last a little bit longer. November focused. Your food has to be November focused. And what I mean by that is you want balance during that time of year. You want diversity. You want food that is good for sometime in mid to late September, sometime in October, sometime in November, December. And that takes creating, we plant in 2 different types of plantings in each plot, sometimes 3 if we have corn added. The bottom line is you want them to feed over here in this time of year, feed over here in this time of year, or this time of the season. And if you don't have enough food to last through November, December, you need to get rid of your summer food. You never want summer food if it's at the expense of the volume you need to make it through the deer season. You really need to think about that. And the summer food, if you don't have enough to make it through the fall, then you need to get rid of your summer food because you bring more deer into that area. You create a doe factory. Does and fawns stay there all summer. And then when you have food in the fall, they stay there. They're home bodies. They don't leave. And it puts an extreme amount of pressure on your land. And you can get rid of those summer does and fawns by just simply getting rid of the does and the summer food. Let them go elsewhere. Let them spread out and establish themselves, establish their fawning ground somewhere else. And that means that when you have your fall food growing, you get more volume because you don't have an army of does and fawns waiting for it to sprout right up. As soon as it's green, they just hammer it. There's a little lag time in there, 3, 4 weeks, 2 weeks. Doesn't matter. It allows you to get more volume, and that'll last. So for one thing, you don't focus on the summer at the expense of November, and at the same time, by getting rid of the summer food, you automatically reduce your deer population without ever firing a shot. That's the first step in herd reduction, is getting rid of the summer food. And obviously, if you have fewer deer, your food lasts longer. And then number 5 down here, nutrients, pH, weeds. You'd think that was important. You got to put fertilizer down. In fact, sometimes I forget to mention it because it's so basic that you just assume everyone's doing it when they're not. You have to have good weed control. Address your pH levels, because if your pH levels aren't correct, they're not going to be able to take up the nutrients. We use Deer Grow, and I love Deer Grow. If the pH is really bad, let's say it's a 4.7, 5.2, you're better off, instead of 4 tons of lime per acre, maybe you put 1.5 tons, 2 tons, and then we use a 2.5 gallon or a jug of Plot Start within Deer Grow, or 2. And that helps that growing season. It helps the plants take up the nutrients without totally changing the pH, and it helps you leverage the amount of lime that you're actually putting on the ground and reducing that, so you can use that time and money elsewhere. Helps you be more efficient. So bottom line is, you still have to do it. You have to put the fertilizer recommendation down. And then we use Plot Boost on top of that, where we're spraying it on the green foliage so the plants can actually biologically take up the nutrients out of the soil better. But if we don't put fertilizer in the ground, guess what? After 3 or 4 years, there's no more nutrients, even if you use a Plot Boost or something like that from Deer Grow to take up the nutrients. Weed control, critical. This should be basic. Unfortunately, there's people that don't know how to food plot out there or whatever, and they'll say weeds are good on a food plot. It's some diversity during the summertime, but most people shouldn't have summer food plots anyways. And then at the same time, when you get into the fall, those weeds take up valuable space and volume. So we've been to 10-acre food plots that are so full of weeds, they're only getting about 1 acre of food out of that 10 acres total food and volume. The rest are weeds that turn brown. They offer no value in October, November. Again, you need to be November focused. So they just have a 10-acre food plot. They spent a lot on whatever type of magic bean food plot program that they planted. They didn't address weed concerns, and now they're left with a very poor attraction level on a 10-acre field that took a lot of time, money, and various resources to actually get planted, and they didn't plant it correctly because they didn't address the weeds. I have a food plot company, Pure Wildlife Blends, and I'd love to sell this seed to you. I appreciate you guys that have supported us. We had huge support last year and the year before. But the bottom line is, if you're going to buy that seed and you're not going to address weeds, you're not going to address pH, you're not going to address nutrients, I don't care what seed you buy, ours or anybody else's, it's not going to grow. And for that, you're not going to have anything left in November and December. So if you're not going to do that, please don't buy our seed or anybody else's. Focus on this first. You're better off having 2 acres and get 2 acres of volume of food plot than having 10 acres and getting 1 acre. And then when you have that acre within that 10 acres, it's so spread out that it doesn't equal a real good attraction, because deer have to move so far within that acre to actually eat and fill their bellies. You're better off having 2 acres of solid volume, good food growing. And then when you do have that food in there, part of the reason there's so little volume on a 10-acre field full of weeds is because you don't get full growth within that acre that's left of the intended plants within the food plot forage. So you don't get height, you don't get volume, thickness of stem, you don't get the moisture content. And so you're far better off having 2 acres of solid food that you've taken care of than 10 acres of bad food plot that you didn't address weeds, pH, and fertilization. So those are all ways to make sure you have more food going into the hunting season and maintaining during the hunting season without actually ever shooting a deer, because population is only a small part of it. You have to do it right. And of course you could plant more acres, but in the case of the 10 acres and you only have 1 acre's worth of food, they could have 30 acres like that, and they probably don't have enough still because they plant it and they do it poorly. So these are some ways that we use and we address on our own lands and for our clients to really look over hard and say, have you addressed these issues before we even talk about expanding food plots, and can you do a better job? And most of the time, they can check off 3 or 4 or 5 of those and say, we can do a better job with each one of these. And then you know they're probably gonna have twice as much food in November next year, and that's what it's all about, making sure you have enough food, enough browse in the woods, and a good balance to make a healthy, happy home for a good quality deer herd on your property. And when you have that, you'll have a quality hunt. And don't forget about how you manage the hunting strategy and how you manage your hunting pressure, because if you don't do that, this is all for naught. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, or WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also, Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.